And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovich.
Well, hey there, listener. Welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And summer vacation is getting long in the tooth. You know, a number of years ago, right now, I would have been staring at the calendar because football practice starts next week in the great state of Ohio. So I would have been confronted with that, which, you know, it's sad to see summer wane, but it is what we do for a living. And even though it's hard to go back, it's hard to go back to practice, it's hard to go back to school, the second you step in front of those athletes or in front of those students in just a few weeks, it just feels right. I mean, that's what we do. It just feels natural. Today, I'm going to give you a magnificent idea for the first day of school. I'm teaching a brand new class this fall. It's Education 313, Curriculum and Design. So I like to joke with my friends that I teach the two most boring sounding classes at Muskingum University. I teach assessment and curriculum and design. Hallelujah. And my challenge is to make them engaging. I'm determined to engage, speaking of engagement, my third and fourth year students. I mean, these guys are almost ready to take flight and become teachers. I'm determined to engage them right out of the chutes on that first day. I'm also determined to demonstrate to them how they can start creating an outstanding learning environment once they become the teachers in the very near future. Now, I'm going to read something here, and this is interesting. I mean, if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that I'm from the state of Ohio. And, you know, Ohio is one of those states that's just so average in almost every regard. So if we're doing something in the state of Ohio, chances are you're doing it in your state if you don't live here in the Buckeye State. So I'm going to read from the Ohio Teacher Evaluation Rubric. This is under the domain of classroom environment. So this is what the state of Ohio wants to observe in its teachers. To score accomplished on this rubric, you have to do the following. Here's where I'm quoting right here from the Buckeye State. The teacher and students have collaboratively established consistent use of routines, procedures, and transitions that are effective in maximizing instructional time. On-task behavior is evident and ensured by students. Students initiate responsibility for effective operation of the classroom. Bam! There it is, right there. I think it's a great objective. Congratulations, Ohio. I'm totally on board with what you're promoting here. I'm going to certainly attempt to do that in my classroom starting on day one. And I'm going to draw inspiration from the British Isles. And 807 years ago, the Magna Carta was signed by King John in 1215. The King of England, 1215. By doing so, he became a monarch whose power was limited. He agreed to certain demands of his nobles in the process. Now, since then, since 1215, the United Kingdom has become a beacon of good government. Now, I had a pretty rugged biology teacher in high school. On the first day, he informed us that the class was not a democracy and that he was a benevolent dictator. So after we all looked up what the word benevolent meant in the dictionary, we were like, wow, this guy's pretty rugged. And you know, he was a good teacher. I mean, that's kind of the way things were done back then. But he wasn't right all the time, and he could have made things better. Certainly there's a middle ground here between, you know, anarchy, democracy, chaos, and being a benevolent dictator. I'm guessing that the Magna Carta Jigsaw lesson that I'm going to expose you to today is really going to inspire you. Buckle up, man. I think this is a great episode, and it's timely. Here's my elevator pitch for my brand new book, Teaching in Magenta. This book provides 100 ways to create a magnificent day in your classroom. Once you start stringing some magenta days together, you and your students will experience profound well-being and deep joy. That's Teaching in Magenta, which is now available on Amazon's virtual shelves. Now, before we dive into this episode, please head over to my show notes, and you're going to find some important links. The first link, this episode brings back tremendous nostalgia for me, because my very first episode of the Hacking Engagement podcast, which came out in June of 2016, over 6 years ago, was Classroom Procedures Night at the Improv. So this is another option for you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have my students listen to that podcast before we do the Magna Carta Jigsaw. And I'm going to have them ask which they like best and which they might try. So I love that episode. Give it a listen. And also, I have a link to the Magna Carta Jigsaw lesson plan. So anything on here that is unclear to you, you can look at that. And there's links that go away from that lesson plan to all kinds of useful resources. So please check that out. Now, I'm going to talk about some things that you want to do before class, before that first day of school. And this is a really important one. You need to decide what procedures, what classroom rules, what classroom policies you would like to resolve. And I wouldn't make it too many, a handful. That's what I would suggest. And I realize that these are going to be different for a K-12 teacher than for a college instructor. However, there's some crossover, believe me. So here are the 4 procedures that I'm going to have students work out on that Magna Carta Jigsaw activity. Number 1, attendance. And here's what's interesting. You might not have that as a K-12 teacher, but I certainly have it as a college instructor, and I'm teaching an 8 o'clock class, so it's going to be an issue. So it's one that I really want to address. Number 2, late submissions. Students turning in something late or not turning something in. How's that going to be dealt with? Number 3, summative assessment revisions. In other words, take a midterm, can you improve your score? And then 4, cell phone use. I wouldn't be surprised that 2, 3, and 4, late submissions, summative assessment revisions, and cell phone use are probably going to be something that you want to resolve as a K-12 teacher. Now, the next job after you decide what procedures you'd want to resolve is you got to, this is important, create compelling dilemmas around each procedure. Now, I'm going to read my dilemmas here in just a moment. And then you want to print these off and you're going to utilize them during the activity. But the dilemmas represent rational positions one could take on either of these procedures, on any of these procedures, I should say. Now, this is where you still have some control. I know that some of you might think, well, geez, I'm going to let the kids make the rules. They'll make ridiculous rules. Well, you give them choices. And these are choices that you can live with. So I'm going to read right from the handouts that I'm going to give students, and you're going to see, hopefully, what I'm talking about. So dilemma 1 is attendance. Now, here's position A. This is a position that students can take. You are adults. If you don't attend, that's on you. Furthermore, when you miss, your grades almost always suffer. So no extrinsic motivation is needed. There should be no attendance policy for either absences or tardies. Now, that's a rational position in a college class. Here's position B. Instructors are still powerful extrinsic motivators. When they level consequences like attendance grades or alternative assignments, it motivates students to show up on time. Without these consequences, students miss valuable learning opportunities. There should be an attendance policy for both absences or tardies. Now, people, I can live with either one of these positions. I wrote these 2 positions. I can live with either one. So I'm going to allow my students to decide which we're going to do. 8 o'clock class, college students, I bet they choose A. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. The next one is late submissions. So here's the first position. When you penalize for late work, you contaminate assessment. If an A paper is scored a B because it was turned in late, the assessment is inaccurate. If a student misses work, a 0 will be put in the grade book, but the student would have the chance to earn all the points back. So the 0 would be like an extrinsic motivator, but it could be a temporary one. Rational position. Here's position B. Missing deadlines is a societal epidemic. Allowing students to miss deadlines is teaching them bad habits. If a submission is late, it should be docked 10% points for each week that it's late. Incredibly rational position, probably be supported by many educators. I don't care which my students choose. I don't care. My suspicion is they'll go with A as students, but they'll go with B when they become teachers. I'll let you know. All right. Dilemma 3, assessment revision. Life is full of tests, and you rarely get a second chance. If you allow for revisions, you are encouraging students not to take the first attempt seriously. In other words, they can game plan the test because they know they're going to have another opportunity. All right? Rational position. Position B is one of life's most powerful learning experiences is fixing mistakes and misunderstandings. Furthermore, many students suffer from test anxiety, and allowing revision is a great way to ease those fears. I can live with either side of this dilemma. Whichever they choose is fine with me. And the final one. This is an interesting one. Cell phones. Position A. This is the 21st century. Cell phones are a fact of life, and everyone should just learn to deal with it. Or position B. Cell phones are immensely distracting. Students miss vital learning, often doom scrolling on social media. Cell phones will be utilized in this course, but when they aren't, they should be put away. I don't know how they're going to come down on that one. That's going to be really interesting. So here's the deal. You need to make these dilemmas. You need to create these dilemmas and create some handouts that you can give to certain breakout groups and have them work through it. Okay, job 3, randomly assign students to cohort groups. Now, this is based on how many dilemmas you have, and I'm encouraging you to have a handful. So if you have 5 dilemmas, make 5 cohort groups. And you want to sort these students before class starts so those groups are all ready to go. And these cohort groups are where you're going to try to find consensus after the breakout jigsaw groups, which I'll explain momentarily. And then finally, create the guiding Google slide presentation and the Magna Carta Google form. 2 things that you want to create before class. Now, my Google slide presentation is just 9 slides long, and it's just directions on how to progress, and I'm going to read through them here in a minute. You're obviously going to have a link to this. You're going to have a link to the compelling dilemmas, all that stuff. So just bear with me and then go to my show notes and check them out. The other thing is the Magna Carta Google form, and this is going to be the document. This is going to be the Magna Carta document that students are going to be confronted with at the end of class, and you're going to see whether they're going to sign or not. Now, once in class, students will focus on the basic directions on the Google slide presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through those, and you can almost like sit back and pretend like you're in Sturdivant's class, and you can kind of see this unfold. So the very first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to give them a hook. I'm going to try to prime the pump some. And my hook's going to be, what was the most ridiculous school rule that you've been subjected to as a student, and let them like talk a little bit about amongst themselves and maybe offer some examples. Now, you might be hesitant to do this because you might have a persnickety staff member who gets chosen a lot. If that's the case, you might just not make it a school rule, just make it a rule in general and just see what they come up with. On my next slide, I have a 3-minute video. It's a cartoon. It's really cute on the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. This will put some historic context, make some connections to other disciplines there. And I like that being in there. Okay, so we've got like our little hook. We've got our little Magna Carta video. And now I am going to instruct students to go to their little cohort groups. And I'm going to arrange them because they're not going to know what group they're in. So once they're in their groups, this is going to be where the action takes place. This is going to be where the legislation takes place. This is going to be where the debate takes place. But this is a jigsaw activity. So once they're in, their cohort groups, I'm going to assign each group to number off however they want to do it based on how many dilemmas I have that they're going to have to work through. So for me, it's 1 to 4. And they're not going to know what the dilemmas are beforehand. So they're not going to know which one they get to deal with. They're just going to say, I'm a 1, you're 2, 3, 4, so forth. Once they're numbered off, I'm going to instruct students, leave your cohort group, then congregate with others who have your number. And then I'm going to give each number a handout. Like my number 2s, they're over here on this side. I'm going to give them dilemma 2 and let them work their way through it. Same thing for 1, 3, and 4. Now I'm going to give them 5 minutes to discuss the options in this dilemma. And they don't have to come to agreement. They can just talk about them. Like, what are the implications of doing position A? What are the implications of doing position B? Just discuss it. Become familiar with it. Speculate on the implications of either position. That's what I want them to do in those jigsaw groups. Then they're going to return to their cohort group. And now we have a Dilemma 1 expert, a Dilemma 2 expert, a Dilemma 3 expert, and a Dilemma 4 expert. They're going to enlighten their group members in the cohort about their dilemma, and as a group, they're going to try to form consensus on each dilemma. Now, this is an interesting thing. Like, I have 4 dilemmas, so it's conceivable that when it comes to Dilemma 1, that 2 students in the cohort group would go with A and 2 students would go with B, so there'd be no consensus. That's fine. I've got that factored in. If you have 5 dilemmas, then this won't be an issue. But if you have an even number, it will. Now, this is the next step. Each cohort is to designate a spokesperson. When prompted, the spokesperson will indicate the results of discussions within each cohort about each dilemma. Now, at this point, right before this takes place, I would open up the Magna Carta Google form and display it on the board. And right there I have Dilemma 1 attendance. And once I find out if there is a consensus among the cohorts, then I will type that position right there on the Google form so the students can decide whether they're going to sign or not. Now, this is important. The teacher acts like the tiebreaker because remember, you put out positions that you can live with. So if there is no consensus in cohort groups, or if you have an even number cohort groups, like I have 4 cohort groups as well, there might not be a consensus. And if there isn't, I am going to make the decision. So I'm like the tiebreaker. I'm like the vice president when he or she sits in the Senate and casts the deciding vote. All right. So after I have transferred the Google form to reflect the will of the class, or if the will of the class isn't present, my will, then I'm going to present them with a QR code, which will take them right to the Magna Carta Google form. Now, on the Magna Carta Google form, I'll have each dilemma listed with the position taken. I'll give the students the option to agree or disagree. And if they disagree, below that, they're going to have the option to write a narrative explaining why. And if they don't write that narrative, I'm going to follow up with them. But I want, hey, like, I disagree with that attendance policy, and here's why. I want that narrative there. I'm going to really encourage them to do that. I'm going to have them go through each dilemma, and then at the end, I'm going to have this prompt on the Google form. They have 3 choices. Here's the first choice. I will attempt to comply with the consensus on the classroom procedures. Hit that button, and then you sign your name below where I prompt you. Like, you are a full-fledged advocate of the Education 313 Magna Carta. All right? Next option. I will attempt to comply with the consensus on the Google procedures with the exception of the ones in which I composed a dissenting narrative. Now, look, you have all kinds of useful information here as a teacher. You know what student struggles with what procedure. What a leg up on the first day. So maybe you can interact with that student and talk a little bit about their struggles. And then the final option is, I don't want to comply with the consensus on the classroom procedures. I agree to meet with Mr. Sturdivant and work out a solution. Wow, it's all set up for you. You are preempting problems with this activity, which I think is really powerful. Now, once again, before I wrap up here, I want to read from the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, the accomplished box when it comes to classroom environment. The teacher and students have collaboratively established consistent use of routines. Check. Procedures and transitions that are effective in maximizing instructional time. Check. On-task behavior is evident and ensured by students. Hopefully, check. And students initiate responsibility for effectively operation of the classroom. Check, 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 check. Big check right there. So, if I'm looking at that rubric and I'm an administrator and I'm seeing what this teacher did on the first day, I'm impressed. So we are at the What You Could Do Tomorrow section, and the very first thing I want you to do is read your state's teacher standards for classroom environment. And I'll bet there's a rubric there. See what accomplished is or the highest score you can get. I'll bet you'll find that some of these directives you can satisfy, if not all of these directives, you can satisfy with this classroom activity on the first day. And then read the Magna Carta Jigsaw activity lesson plan on my show notes. And folks, I've got a lot of links on there, so go check them out, please. Number 3, create rational sides to classroom procedures dilemmas, and these have to be sides that you can live with. 4, formulate your cohorts based on the number of dilemmas. If you have 5 dilemmas, you have 5 cohorts. Create your Google Slides and your Magna Carta Google form. You want to do that beforehand and make that Google Slide thing just directions on how to work through the jigsaw activity, but please steal my hooks if you like them. And finally, be prepared to collaborate with dissenting students. You have the data there in front of you. You have the information there. You know who's going to struggle with some classroom procedures, and you can preemptively work with that youngster. That's gold, man. Hey, teacher evaluation rubrics can be intimidating, but maybe you can embrace various aspects of these rubrics throughout the year. There's a potential that by embracing the rubric, not just during the evaluation period, but like on the first day of school, you could significantly enhance the learning experience for your students. Hey, good luck this year and get off on the right foot with your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesallensturdivant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.